This is the LG UltraGear Evo GX9, a 39-inch curved 5K 2K display, and one of the most anticipated launches of 2026, and a sibling model to the previous year's 45-inch LG UltraGear GX9 display. But this year's 39-inch model has a lot going for it, and will be especially interesting for those who are considering upgrading to an ultra-wide but who don't want to go too big or too wide. From being one of the largest 4th gen tandem OLED displays that I've seen before, to fixing some of the community's biggest bugbears when it comes to display stream compression. Now, as always, I've been nagging LG ever since I saw this at CES early this year, and they finally agreed to send me this screen ahead of its launch and agree to sponsor this video. So my goal here is to create one of the most detailed reviews of this monitor here on YouTube, as well as answer the most common questions around whether you should buy one, including comparing this to last year's 45-inch LG UltraGear. Now, as always, feel free to ask any questions down below, and I will try to answer as many as I can. And if you find this helpful in any way possible, do consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps in more ways you can ever really imagine. And with that said, starting off with the unboxing, which is a nice and simple process here. The box itself, yeah, is quite big, but still easily manageable with just one person.
That's what she said.
Now, in terms of the accessories, we get one gigantic power brick, a power cable, an HDMI and DisplayPort cable, which is certified for DisplayPort 80, and a USB-C cable, which all of these are 6 foot or 1.8 meters in length. Now, there's also this plastic cover, which is used to hide the ports and some of the cabling on the back, and of course, the stand itself, which comes in 2 parts. Now, all of it is super easy to unbox and assemble. The stand just simply slots into the base. It does up with a single thumb screw and then just clicks into the back of the monitor. Otherwise, it's just a case of picking it up, placing it on your desk, and since this is an OLED, although the size is a bit awkward being 39 inches, it is nice and light to carry, so you should be just fine doing this without needing any help. And overall, this is the same clean, refreshed design that we get with the LG UltraGear monitors that would work well in both an office or a gaming environment. It is sleek, fairly minimal, but there is still a hint of it being predominantly a gaming monitor with a simple LED design on the back, not even an LG logo visible on the front here, and without any aggressive design choices on the back, which I did find the LED strip on the back was off by default, but you can set it to a static color or have it cycle through to suit your preferences. And there is also a ton of certifications, flicker-free, discomfort glare-free display, low blue light, as well as verified for reducing circadian stimulating blue lights, which overall will just give you a much more comfortable viewing experience, especially if you are sat in front of a monitor for long periods of time. Now, that aside, construction feels solid, the ports are easily accessible, even the panel to cover the ports is really well built. It doesn't seem like it will just snap off like other panels have. Just ergonomically speaking, it is a solid display. Now, you also have a quick release button on the stand, simple but effective cable management, easy access to the screen controls, and there is also the dual mode switch on the bottom here, which allows you to switch between 5K 2K at 165 Hz and 1080p at 330 Hz, which we'll check out in a bit. Now, it is good to see that LG have stuck with their pretty rock solid stand this year with a nice low profile that doesn't intrude onto the desk and gives you, back your desk space that otherwise might be lost to their somewhat bulkier stands from previous. There is also some basic built-in cable management which does the job, although if you have the monitor raised all the way up, then the cables will still be visible. Now, as far as the adjustability goes, you can change the height, tilt, and swivel. Officially speaking, there is no pivot, but it does pivot ever so slightly either way, but you won't be able to use this stand to put the monitor into portrait mode. Now, the only way to do this would be to put your monitor onto a monitor arm, which, to be fair, I do with all my monitors anyway, just to save all of that space underneath the screen. Even though you don't lose much space with this slim profile stand, I just find it more flexible to use a desk mount and a monitor arm instead, especially because this monitor is an OLED. It only weighs 15 pounds, so you should be able to find pretty much any monitor arm that supports the weight fairly easily. Now, this one is from Secret Lab, which I love because it just attaches to their desks, matches the whole light mode or dark mode aesthetic really nicely, but generally speaking, any monitor arm should do. Now, let's talk about those specs because this has got some pretty tasty specs. Now, the specific model number for this display is the LG 39GX950B, and this is a 21:9, 39-inch, 5K 2K 4th gen tandem OLED monitor running at 165 Hz with adaptive sync, but can run as high as 330 Hz with that dual mode feature. A feature we saw LG introduced a couple of years back and is pretty much standard, I think, on all of the UltraGear monitors from 2026 and onwards. So you can now game at like the full 5K, 2K for maximum quality, or maybe lower down to 1080p for the smoothest gameplay experience. There is 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, a single DisplayPort's 2.1 ports, and along with one USB-C with 90 watts charging, 2 USB-A 3.2 downstream ports, headphone output, and of course, the power port here. Now, outside of the ports, this screen has a 0.03 millisecond response time, the usual NVIDIA G-Sync and AMD FreeSync Premium Pro, a 1500 R curve. It's also VESA certified display HDR with True Black 500s. And there's also built-in speakers. One of the most interesting features on this screen is their new AI upscaling features for both video and audio. Now, LG says this monitor uses the built-in processor to upscale full HD content to 5K 2K to basically let you enjoy high-quality gaming without requiring a GPU upgrade. Their words, not mine, so we'll definitely put those claims to the test. And on the audio side, now they say the AI sound will enhance game audio for things like footsteps or nearby action through both speakers or connected headphones. So to perhaps point out the obvious, it is definitely not a budget screen. There are a lot of great features here. So let's just start working our way through all of these specs. Now, resolution-wise, no complaints here whatsoever. There is 5K, 2K, so the same 5120 by 2160 that you get on last year's 45-inch model. But since this is 39 inches, that is now at a higher 143 pixels per inch compared to 125 pixels per inch on the 45-inch model. And because of this, it means that this monitor is an excellent choice for productivity with text being sharp, easy to read, it's not pixelated at all, plus you can fit everything you need onto one screen. Also, being a 21:9 aspect ratio means that this can work really well as like a hybrid gaming and productivity screen, and more games will support the 21:9 resolution, unlike even bigger and even wider like 32:9 displays. And just overall, and because I get asked for this a lot, this screen is definitely perfect for those of you who think maybe the 45-inch model might be a bit too big or a bit too curved. It hits the sweet spots on a nice size, but great resolution, great refresh rate, and that 4th gen tandem OLED is just a sight to see. Now, with that said, we also get LG's dual mode button on this screen, which essentially changes your monitor from a 5K 2K 165Hz display to a 1080p display, but with a much higher 330 refresh rate. Now, generally speaking, that might mean that you're going to be in 5K 2K mode for your desktop and then maybe playing AAA games in that same 5K 2K resolution, depending on how powerful your GPU is, or you can then drop down to 1080p for your gaming to just, get maximum performance out of your gaming PC. In addition to just the on-off button you have here, there is also a number of different versions of dual modes, which lets you switch between various 21:9 or 16:9 configurations. So perhaps if you're a competitive gamer and you want to game on a 34, 27 or 24.5 inch display, then you have those options as well. Now, the only issue I can see here is that there is no real middle ground here. You can't have a slightly lower resolution to get a slightly better refresh rate. You have to drop all the way down to 1080p to get the 330 Hertz. There's no like 1440p at 240 Hertz or anything like that, but you can select either 120 or 240 Hertz in that lower 1080p resolution. You just can't get any higher than 1080p. Although you don't have to drop down to the actual 1920 by 1080p resolution. When hitting dual mode, you actually drop down to 2560 by 1080p. So that's higher than your typical kind of standard HD resolution. Now, we recently took delivery of 2 flagship gaming PCs from Dell and MSI. One is an Intel and one is an AMD build, both running 5090 GPUs. So in a minute, I will also give you a quick rundown of how various games perform as well. But before I do, I want to check out the AI upscaling feature because they are saying that you can play full HD games upscaled to 5K 2K without requiring a GPU upgrade. Now, this works across all platforms, so you can hook up a PC, PS5, Xbox, or even a Switch and benefit from improved graphics. Now, generally speaking, it only works in 1080p resolution and at 60 Hz. Now, this may also be possible above 1080p and 60 Hz, but Windows scaling always gets in the way here, as no matter what your settings are, Windows will still detect the active signal as 5K 2K, and therefore LG's AI upscaling will not work. But with that said, and especially comparing NVIDIA's DLSS upscaling to LG's AI upscaling, it doesn't even come close. Where LG's AI upscaling seems to just sharpen the existing image, a DLSS is much more like actual AI assisted sharpening, at least when talking about games at 1080p. And with just DLSS looking vastly better in every situation we tested. But if you are perhaps a Switch gamer, then this could be of interest as it can make some notable improvements. Games are definitely sharper when comparing switching AI upscaling off and on. The game just looks blurry when compared to when it's switched on. Here you can see there are definitely some noticeable differences and improvements to the sharpness and clarity, looking particularly at the edges to notice the sharpening, and in this example from PC, with the wood grain on the huts and the detail of the tree roots. Now, it is not huge, but for all of those who do like to game on a dockable handheld console, this is a nice feature to have, and if you are someone who does happen to play, AAA titles, but maybe your PC isn't powerful enough, then it could be worth trying out. Now, there are also some AI audio features here that analyze the on-screen action to help separate audio tracks for things like footsteps and game chat and so on, both through speakers and through wired headphones. Now, as perhaps glazing as this review may be so far, this is definitely one area that I definitely didn't get on with this monitor. Now, as far as the speakers go, to my ears, they sound pretty bad. Now, generally speaking, speakers on, any monitor are pretty bad at the best of times, and normally I would just recommend getting a good gaming headset or a good set of speakers, then move on with the video. But since AI sound is a feature here, we've got to put them under the microscope a little bit more than we normally would do. Hey, Future Pete here. So we've actually been talking to LG about the AI audio side of things, and we've discovered that the monitor we have is running, I know it's like a pre-production monitor, but it's running like pre-production version of the AI sound on there. It's like version 1, essentially. So take everything I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. They have updated it. They say they have improved it. So we haven't had a chance to test it yet, but just be aware that everything you're about to hear is based on the pre-production version of this AI kind of sound driver. No matter what I tried here, gameplay, music, I tried turning the AI sound feature on and off, as well as enabling and disabling the bass boost feature. I tried changing the volume. Nothing I did could get me away from the audio sounding either like really thin and really tinny, or when enabling the bass boost feature, sounding like everything was in a box. Overall, my advice hasn't really changed here. Get a good set of speakers, or a gaming headset. I'll, of course, link to a few of my favorites at each budget down below. Now, moving on, and this is a curved gaming monitor. And generally speaking, the bigger the monitor, then the bigger the curve that you want for that whole immersiveness. Now, LG's previous 45-inch UltraGear monitor comes with a pretty significant 800R curve, which I love as a gamer. Now, this 39-inch model has a 1500R curve, which is much shallower, but with this size, I find that it works really, really nicely since the screen isn't that big. There's no leaning or stretching to see the corners, which can happen in some of the much larger and even more ultra-wide displays. It is still curved enough to give you that whole immersive look and feel in games, which I love, but still straight enough for those of you who want to draw straight lines and do CAD design and that sort of thing. And the monitor itself is still small enough, so looking at your heads-up display around you, mini-maps, stratagems and helldivers, those sorts of things are all still a very easy glance away. But with that said, there is something I want to highlight here with that 1500R curve. Now, in terms of reflections, this does have something they're calling a discomfort glare-free matte coating on the display, which does a great job at minimizing glare and reflections, even when in brightly lit environments like we are here. And generally speaking, I'm using this in, quite a bright and light space here, loads of windows, loads of lights, and I don't have any issues. But you might be able to see in some of the video footage, I actually had to switch off a light behind me because it kind of got in the way a lot of the time. And when you mix in the curve of this display, any bright light sources that are behind you, here I used a pulsable light to demonstrate, depending on the angle, the light just spreads across the screen. But this isn't unique to the LG, the 57-inch Samsung screen here has the same issue, and it's basically just something you get with curved screens. It's like standing in a curved mirror where you see your reflection no matter where you look, and it's the same here with bright light sources. But again, like I said, generally speaking, I haven't noticed this. It's only when I've had a bright light or a direct light source placed in just the right, or I guess just the wrong position, that caused the issue here. And realistically speaking, rotating your monitor a fraction could then solve that problem. Otherwise, the matte coating is quite impressive how it dissipates bright light sources. I do personally prefer a more glossy finish with this, where it doesn't disperse the light so much. Compare this, for example, to the LG G5 glossy TV we have here, and it's just a night and day difference. Good or bad, depending on how you look at it. Now, I know, again, not everyone likes matte coatings, but from my understanding, this is where the likes of LG and Samsung are really pushing into with their screens. But I do believe there may be glossy versions available from other brands in the near future, which coincidentally still use an LG panel, but especially with curved screens. If you have a glossy version of this screen, then it's just going to look probably even more horrendous when it reflects everything in the room around you like a mirror. And as far as I can tell, there is little to no degradation in image quality or color reproduction because of this coating. Now, this monitor also benefits from the 4th gen tandem OLED technology here with peak brightness on this OLED. Now, on paper, it should reach up to 1500 peak nits at 1.5%, which is really impressive for an OLED. I know this isn't anything like a comparison, but Apple's latest Studio display is a mini LED and can do 2000 peak nits in HDR. So we are getting very close now to mini LED brightness, but with all of the benefits of OLED, and especially 4th gen OLED, which is less susceptible to burn-in, which is a big concern to a lot of people, especially when investing this sort of money into a monitor that will last you potentially years to come. Though at this stage, it is still too new to know if any of those claims are actually real or not. Now, as we cycled through the various window sizes here, at 100% Windows, it reached around 350 nits, which is very bright compared to others we've tested. But we did see close to 1350 at almost 10%, which is very impressive. So overall, this is a very bright monitor and leading in its class. Now, something I've also started checking recently is to check how even that brightness is across the full panel. And as you can see here, there is definitely some fall off, specifically on the left edge. It's not really noticeable in person, but it's definitely there, which to my mind shouldn't exist for OLEDs, but would definitely be more prominent with back or edge lid panels. But with that said, color accuracy is great here, as you'd expect with an OLED. We've got 99.5% DCI-P3 and a 1.85 million to 1 contrast ratio. So it's got good color accuracy, great contrast for watching content, general productivity, professional work like graphics or video work, as well as gaming. And there is also no blooming like you get with non-OLED panels. Personally, this is a big reason why I enjoy using OLEDs, and especially with this 4th gen tandem OLED, that there's next to zero blooming or haloing around bright objects. Ghosting is also incredible here. We actually recently compared the LG's 4th gen tandem OLED panel to the Dell 52-inch IPS and Samsung 57 mini LED, and it is a huge night and day difference. The LG panel is just so much sharper. And again, since this is OLED, it can switch off any black pixels to give you truly deep blacks, whilst also giving a really consistent image across the screen without any unintentional bright or dim areas that other monitors suffer from, which have those multiple dimming zones. But whilst 4th gen tandem OLED may be the latest and greatest thing, it also has some equally valid concerns with burn-in, which LG does cover under its 2-year standard warranty. But I know 2 years isn't really a huge amount when you're dropping a pretty decent amount into buying one of these screens, especially when still TVs get covered for upwards of 5-6 years plus. I still don't understand why monitors can't be covered under the same terms as TVs. And yes, for those of you who are asking, we will be doing a follow-up video where I actually use a latest generation TV as a monitor just to see how well that works, so subscribe for that one. But this screen does have a couple of features to protect against burn-in. Firstly, there's a screensaver, which detects if there's no change on the screen for a long time, and then it just switches it off. There is also a pixel cleaning feature here. And also just make sure you implement good practices like, don't leave your screen on all day with a static image. Turn on the features that let you switch off the screen after a certain amount of time, if it's not in use. Just be sensible with the screen, and especially a flagship screen like this, and it's cost you a fair amount of money. But again, from my own personal experience and what I gather from online, burn-in is becoming less and less common, especially as this newer 4th gen tandem OLED technology comes in. I'm yet to actually see anybody burn in, I think, a 4th gen tandem OLED display, so who knows, maybe it's not a problem anymore. But again, like I said, warranty, burn-in tools, hopefully protect against that as well. Now next, let's talk about connectivity. So you've got 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, 1 DisplayPort 2.1 port. Thank you, LG. This operates at UHBR20, which means no display stream compression. Plus, there is a single USB-C port that provides a 90-watt charge as well. Plus, there is also 2 USB Type-A downstream ports. Now that UHBR 20 DisplayPort 2.1 port especially is good to see here, since this is by far one of the biggest complaints I've seen online here. So now we finally get the full 80 gigabits per second UHBR spec, which now means it can display 165 Hz at full native 5K 2K resolution without needing to use display stream compression to get there, which is something that the 45-inch UltraGear can't do. Now, USB-C, as always, is a nice addition, especially for Mac users. You will be super happy to know that this feature exists. There are also 2 USB-A ports to hook up things like webcams, maybe a USB dongle for, wireless keyboard and mouse. But this, of course, only works if you are hooked up via that USB-C port. And there is no USB KVM, since there is only one USB upstream port, so you can't switch one set of USB devices between your multiple machines. So if you are looking for a screen for multiple devices on screen at once, then this one probably isn't for you. I think like the 52-inch Dell ultrawide is like the gold standard when it comes to KVM. But otherwise, no dice here with the LG. Now, as far as the display working with Mac goes, it's honestly pretty flawless. A single cable will pass display plus those 2 USB-A ports. Now, one thing I did notice, my M4 MacBook Air was able to reach the full native resolution, full refresh rate using the included cable, and with HDR support, which really surprisingly didn't like fudge up all the colors when you enable it on Mac. I just find on some monitors that you enable HDR and the colors just go all kind of screwy, but you can comfortably leave this with HDR enabled with no real issues. Now, again, I daily drive an M4 MacBook Air as my main machine, and with my M4 MacBook Air, when I tap the dual mode button, I actually get 330 Hz at 1080p, as well as 240 Hz and 120 Hz, which I just mean, it's totally pointless on a Mac, for sure, like with how limiting it is for gaming. Now, off topic, I know, but imagine if Apple just paid a few billion to just kickstart game developers to make, the most popular like AAA titles run on metal on Mac. It would be just like game over. But anyway, if you have anything more than a couple of USB devices, you are still going to want a proper dock or a hub still. I am using the CalDigit TS5 Plus, which lets me hook up my microphone, speakers, webcam. It also has a 10 gig Ethernet port on it, SD, micro SD, and just a bunch more USB A and C ports. So I would still recommend that to any Mac user. But this aside, 90 watt charging works well from the screen, which, unless you have a really high spec machine and you are constantly pushing it to like the maximum, it will keep you fully charged whilst connected. Now, over in Windows, honestly, no issues whatsoever. I'm getting the full resolution, full 165 Hz over both DisplayPort and HDMI on both of our PC builds here. Intel, AMD, both with 5090 cards, zero issues. I wouldn't expect to have any issues with those sorts of builds. And of course, just check that your graphics card will support those kind of resolutions and refresh rate. Now, one thing I will note is that under Windows display settings, it does report a different peak brightness than advertised. And we noted that this is due to Windows reporting on a 10% window measurement versus LG's marketed 1.5% window. And again, with Windows, tapping the dual mode button switches to 330 Hz at full HD. There is no issues at all, it just all works as you would expect here. Now, gaming performance, I'm going to touch on very briefly because I know some people hate it, some people love this part. I like to use it as an excuse to play games and call it work. Now, I'm going to link to both of the PCs we've used down below so you have an idea of what specs we're running, but they are both current generation top spec AMD and Intel machines. I was just super interested to actually see what the difference would be in terms of raw gaming performance between AMD and Intel builds. So on screen now, here are the sorts of FPS we hit with each game set to its highest quality settings and when in the full 5K 2K native resolution and 165 Hz refresh rate. Now, nothing here is overclocked. I've not tweaked anything, just literally stuck with out-of-the-box settings with the latest drivers and firmware on absolutely everything, with all of the games set to its like max, ultra highest quality settings. And then, of course, naturally, if you drop down to 1080p dual mode, then performance can, of course, dramatically improve, again, depending on the game you're playing. But you now have the flexibility here to choose between either higher graphical fidelity or perhaps better performance. Quickly touching on console performance here, since the aspect ratio is 21:9, by default, it will stretch the image to fit, but you can go in and change the aspect ratio to original to fix that, but then you do get the black bars down either side. Now, on the PS5, it supports 120 at 1080p, but only 60 Hz at 4K, but does support VRR and HDR. So if you do happen to buy one of these with the intention of using it for console gaming, just be aware of those limitations. And just remember that consoles will also tap out at 120 Hz, so you won't be able to get above 120 from anything but a computer. And also noting when we mentioned previously on the AI upscaling features, if you dropped your consoles down to 1080p and 60 Hz refresh rate, then you could theoretically then upscale games to 4K quality, which could be especially useful, more specifically for dockable handhelds, maybe such as the Nintendo Switch. So if that is something that's maybe sitting next to your desktop PC, I can see that being a really nice way to play your console games as well. Now, in terms of other features on this monitor, you have picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture, which you can control using the on-screen menu system. Pretty straightforward here. Now, when I tried using both my PC and my Mac side by side, I noticed that the Mac dropped to 60 Hz and the PC then maxed out at 75 Hz at the native resolution with no option to force either back to anything higher. So just be aware of that if you plan to have two systems side by side. Now, the on-screen controls also worked really well here. The little kind of nipple thing down here is on the back of the screen. There is quick access to everything you need. It's not bloated in a ton of features and options for things that you don't care for. There's no smart interface which slows it and bloats it. You've still got options for a crosshair and an FPS counter if you kind of want to use those. Although I will note that the FPS counter seems to read the refresh rate rather than actual FPS, so just be aware of that as well. Plus, as always with LG UltraGears, you can set custom shortcuts on that on-screen display to your most often used features to quickly switch inputs or change your color profiles. I think LG, have just definitely nailed their OSD. It's just filled with stuff you actually want to use without going overboard with settings and features and a whole menu system and everything. Now let's cover off temperatures too. There is no issues here. Being OLED definitely helps, and so during regular use, it doesn't get too warm. It runs a few degrees cooler than the 45-inch model. I saw around 32 degrees Celsius at the hottest part, which is usually at the top here where all the heat's coming out, but generally nothing to be concerned about. It is nowhere near being too warm to touch or anything along those lines. Now, I don't think there is a fan inside this model. If there is, it's a very, very quiet one. I just know there was a fan in one of the first generation dual mode screens I reviewed, but honestly, there is no scenario that we've been able to do here so far that have meant we can hear any form of noise from this screen. Now, as far as energy consumption goes, in general use, it hovers around 60 to 70 watts of usage. Although, if you show a full page of white on high HDR mode and 330 Hz refresh rate, it can go up to 100 watts. So if you are a bit conscious of power usage, it is worth just basically switching to dark mode all the way. And then, of course, if all else fails, you've got LG with a 2-year warranty that includes burn-in protection, like I said. Now, although I would still love to see monitors get a 5 to 6 year warranty that all TVs seem to have, especially since these larger ultra-wide monitors are basically the size of TVs nowadays. It is great for productivity, great for gaming, and with that dual mode feature to switch between quality or speed, this really is a great monitor, albeit a premium price monitor, but I think a solid purchase for anybody considering buying one. Now, the problem really is, every year, monitors getting better, and you might be constantly waiting to get the next monitor with all your, dream specs. But then those dream specs just get more and more absurd each year when previous year's wishes become reality. So it just depends on, how long are you willing to wait? But realistically, those who buy the screen here aren't going to be disappointed. Now, between last year's 45-inch UltraGear and this year's 39-inch model, personally, I would recommend the 39-inch model now. You've got that 4th gen tandem OLED display, which looks so nice. Even though, yes, it's a smaller screen, but you also get better PPI. And again, generally, the 39-inch will look better, brighter, more vivid. Now, there is also the 52-inch UltraGear that launched this year with LG, but I'm hoping to get my hands on that soon for review. Again, subscribe if you want to hear more on that one. And also, ask it down in the comments. Hopefully, LG will reach out and offer that to us as well. Now, if you have any other questions, please do leave them down below. I'll do my best to answer each and every one of them. I will also leave links down below for you to go find the best price and check it out for yourself. A huge thanks for watching. I hope this was useful, informative, and if you want to see how this compares to the previous generation, then you can click here to go and watch that one.